Yeah. And I like what you said about just variety in general. Like the body really thrives on diversity with
Yep.
foods, fats. We need monounsaturated, saturated, polyunsaturated
Yeah.
fats. We need a diverse array of different nutrients, vitamins, minerals, antioxidants. So just rotating through as many different types of foods as you can. So, a topic that we've been really wanting to cover that's very newsworthy lately is the topic of seed oils, which we'll explain exactly what that is. And it's a very hot topic in the nutrition world. And especially it's become newsworthy and topical due to the MAHA or Make America Healthy Again movement, which we've also covered in this podcast. So, yeah, Carla, let's get into it. There's a lot to say about this. Just to kick us off, should we talk
Yeah.
about what seed oils are?
Yeah. And, before we even get to that point, I want to make sure that people understand this category of fat because one of the questions I get asked a lot is, okay, what is a seed oil? What is, other oils or fats? Like, where do they belong? How much of it should I be eating? Right. So I just want to go over real quick, just take a minute to go over that. So fats are categorized into different categories, which is why sometimes in the media they'll say good or bad fat. That's something that we can discuss later. That's not something that I think is necessarily needed, but it's more the balance of fats and the ratios of fats because we actually do need almost all natural fats in a certain amount. So we have our saturated fats, which Mary likes to describe, which are solid at room temperature, which is very true. So if you think about butter or lard or tallow or even coconut oil, those are saturated fats. Typically, these come from animals with the exception of tropical oils like palm oil and coconut oil. So those are your saturated fats. And we know that the US dietary guidelines, the World Health Organization, and the American Heart Association, they recommend limiting this daily to less than 6% of your total calories. So this is important to note. Later on, we'll talk about that. But this is a fat that is usually in the media that has some type of quote unquote, maybe correlation with heart disease or something like that. That is also a different story for a different day, but we'll get into that a little later.
Oh, yeah. And the nutrition community has really gone to bat for saturated fats, which they claim have been unfairly demonized. So it's a bit nuanced, but we'll talk about that.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, so we have our saturated and then we have our unsaturated fats. And our unsaturated fats is where we're going to be kind of focusing on today. So we have monounsaturated fats, which include your avocados, your olive oils, a lot of your nuts, and then your polyunsaturated fats, which are another form of vegetable oils. So under that category, you have your omega 6s and you have your omega 3s. And vegetable oils fall under this category of omega 6s, which is really the ones that we're going to be focusing on today.
Yeah. And just to say, polyunsaturated fats are typically very unstable when heated. So we never cook with polyunsaturated fats. And those are flax oil is one of the most common examples. And omega 6s are monounsaturated, which are more stable to cook with. And then saturated, of course, are some of the most stable fats to cook with. And when we say stable, what we mean is that they don't break down and turn rancid under high heat.
Yes, definitely. Let's get into the topic, which is what are seed oils? So as I just described, they fall under this omega 6 category. However, the vegetable oils categories can come from many type of plants. So that can be canola, cottonseed, corn oil, peanut, sesame, grapeseed, soy, sunflower, safflower. These are all oils that are typically very cheap to make because there's a surplus of them. And because of that, they can cost less, unlike olive oil, which can be very expensive if it's a high quality olive oil. And this is really where the seed oil misinformation kind of comes into play. Claims that they cause, inflammation and type 2 diabetes and chronic disease, which has led to this anti-seed oil movement that we're hearing from MAHA.
Yeah. And I think part of the problem is that Historically, so everything you just described as a seed oil. And this is what we learned in school. The holistic nutrition community likes to say that it takes a lot of energy and a lot more processing to squeeze oil out of a seed than it does to, say, get it out of a coconut or an olive oil. And there are often solvents used in this processing, like hexane and other chemicals that make the extraction process easier. So that's another reason why a lot of these seed oils and these omega-6 oils have been demonized, is some of the processing methods are deemed unhealthy in terms of the final product turning out, where the oil can be more susceptible to rancidity. And so, as you described, one of the biggest claims about seed oils in the holistic nutrition community has been that they are a top contributor to inflammation. And inflammation, we know, is one of the major causes of disease. So that they cause inflammation, and that they are an indirect cause of heart disease. And this is because they tend to, or it is thought that they tend to go rancid more easily due to these kind of processing and extraction methods.
Yeah, exactly. However, we've recently found out, I think it was last year when the big study came out, Mary, science is really showing that replacing plant oil over animal products can be incredibly beneficial, particularly omega 6s. And so we're seeing now that studies are showing that higher intake of omega 6 can be associated with lower risk of cardiovascular disease, type 2 diabetes, lower mortality risk, as well as lower risk of CVD and cancer. So it's interesting that we're now, saying that these seed oils are really bad, when in reality, the science is showing, a very different view. And, maybe we should also mention, Mary, I was also in this camp years ago. I
Oh,
feel
and
like,
me too.
yeah, exactly. Where this idea of seed oils was just like the devil. It was like the worst thing you could put in your body. You would avoid them at all costs. Sometimes to even like, I think you're like socially being isolated, because it would be really difficult to eat out, because restaurants, fast food places, people use these oils because they're so cheap. Restaurants are not going to be using extra virgin olive oil in the food that they make for you. So it can, it started to, like, I feel like, really affect my social life. And I had to start to understand, how can I find a balance in this? And I think we talked about this a little bit in our episode where we discussed orthorexia.
Yeah, I'll know. I think I told you this story, and I'll never forget when I was in school for nutrition and I was in an airport and ordering a salad, and I asked the cashier if this dressing was made with soybean oil, and I'll never forget the look he gave me. And it was
Jesus,
just,
that's right.
that was the extent of, and going to the Whole Foods hot bar where they use so much canola, I refused to eat anything with any molecule of seed oil in it. And yeah, it became super stressful.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's really interesting because there's more science to show that excessive intake of saturated fat is more dangerous for you than excessive intake of omega 6, but yet that is the replacement solution, is what they're offering, is they want to replace these seed oils with tallow. And that, I think, is just a recipe for disaster. I can just already see, the rates of certain heart disease and all of that going up, cholesterol, whatever it is. And it just sounds really dangerous to me that these alternatives are even being offered instead of some other kind of, I don't know, rationale into what is a solution other than just going back to animal fats.
Well, of course, they being the MAHA
Yeah.
movement and RFK spearheading this movement, that the holistic nutrition community and the holistic health community is really glomming onto, because that has been one of their main platforms for so long, is that saturated fat is not the problem. Saturated fat does not cause heart disease. Saturated fat does not cause high cholesterol. And the problem is actually sugar and refined carbohydrates. So remember how we've talked a lot on these episodes about how both things can be true and it's not an either or. So yes, both, in certain people, saturated fats do have the power to raise cholesterol levels. And another talking point that the holistic nutrition community loves is that high cholesterol does not cause heart disease. And so again, in all cases, that may not be true, but it definitely can cause cardiovascular and arterial sclerosis issues in some people. So there are no sweeping generalizations where you can across the board say saturated fat does not cause heart disease. The problem is sugar. So, like I said, both things can be true in this case. And so, as you said, so the latest MAHA movement platform is taking these seed oils completely out of our food supply, replacing them with saturated fats that are more stable. And this could have an absolutely negative effect on public health.
Yes, exactly. And I just want to mention too, like genetics, like you were saying, genetics have such an important play in this decision of whether or not, your body responds negatively or positively to a specific fat, specifically saturated fats. I have seen, some people are really sensitive to them
Yeah.
and they just have to maybe limit their intake more than others. So, this is the thing with nutrition, it's never black or white.
Yeah,
And I
exactly.
feel like yeah, and making these claims that affect literally all Americans because in my opinion, I don't think this is based off science. I think it's more of an opinion. I think right now the decisions that are being made are definitely just, like a personal outlook. It's incredibly dangerous and can really make people suffer. So,
Well, and you can tell by genetic testing how what your susceptibility is for saturated fat, for example, to raise cholesterol. So, I've had genetic
mm,
testing and it turns out I don't have the gene that makes me susceptible to heart disease or high cholesterol via saturated fats. So some people, as you
mm,
said,
mm,
don't, perhaps genetically, their genome, they're wired where saturated fats will affect them differently than another person. And remember the other day, too, I think we were chatting about how in 50 years, things that we think about nutrition now are going to evolve and change. So, nutrition is a science, and science is always evolving and changing. And we, in the 80s, thought all fat was the enemy, remember? And everything was low fat, and so we ate our Snackwell cookies that were low fat, but what did they replace the fat with? Sugar. They
Slim
replaced
fast.
they replaced Slim Fast, yes, and the Special K diet, all that.
Yeah.
So what did they replace fats with in all foods? Was sugar. And we saw very negative public health outcomes from that also. That's sort of around the times when we saw our obesity and diabetes rates start to skyrocket.
Yeah, absolutely. I remember when the whole coconut oil craze was going on, which,
Oh, yeah.
may still be going on. I just am not as much of a part of it as I used to be.
Coconut oil really had a moment, didn't it?
It really did. Yeah, and I still have some in my kitchen. I just don't use it as often, and it is because, after a year or 2 of using it, like pretty much replacing all of my oil with coconut oil, I really did see my cholesterol go up
Same
quite
here.
significantly. Yeah,
Yeah,
and
and
it's scary.
what's interesting about coconut oil, because we all jumped on the coconut oil bandwagon. Put it on your hair, put it on your skin,
Yes.
cook with it. And so coconut oil absolutely can raise your HDL cholesterol, which is your good
LDL,
cholesterol.
LDL.
Well, and I was going to say, it not only can raise your HDL, it also
Oh,
raises your LDL,
yes,
which
yes, yes,
therefore raises your total cholesterol. So
yes.
while it can raise your HDL, the quote good cholesterol, it also raises your LDL, which is the bad cholesterol, and that's what I saw in my blood work too.
Yeah, yeah, it was pretty consistent with almost even my family. I was monitoring them because I essentially am telling them, what to do, what to eat, what to modify in their kitchen. And I had everyone on coconut oil. And by the time I realized what was going on with me, I was like, oh my God. I told my parents to stop using it immediately because I was scared. They have other health worries or conditions, that I don't. Like, I feel like I can sacrifice a little bit. But for me to be telling people to be using this and potentially be harming their health, that was really scary. So
Yeah.
I am not necessarily like pro coconut oil, but I'm also not, you can't ever use it. I think that there's always moderation. And that's what I was trying to say at the beginning with every kind of fat. It's not that it's black or white. It's not that it's good or bad. And that goes for every ingredient, for every food, just like you were mentioning, Mary. There's always a moment in history where a certain food is villainized or a certain food is praised. And that is not going to make or break your health. You need to look at the whole picture. You need to take a step back and look at everything else you're doing in your life to affect your health. And
Yeah.
so
Well
obsessing
said.
about, yeah, and obsessing about these like little things, especially which I feel is going on now, like we're prioritizing these single ingredients,
Yeah.
is not going to really do much for your overall health.
Well, and going back to what you were saying about coconut oil, I think the reason everybody jumped on that bandwagon too is because as a saturated fat, it is one of the few plant based saturated fats, but
Mhm.
it is also seen as a saturated fat to be very stable, a very stable cooking oil. And one of the potentially false fear mongering talking points around seed oils is that they go easily rancid. And when we say easily rancid, it means that for whatever reason, whether it's the processing or light exposure, it causes them to essentially be spoiled. And then when you eat that, you eat those particular rancid type foods or oils, they oxidize in your system, and oxidation causes, free radical damage, which leads to disease. So the thought process behind coconut oil was, oh, it's very stable under heat. It won't break down and go rancid. But these omega-6 oils go rancid very easily. But we know that that's kind of not true. They do hold up under high heat fairly well. So a lot of these talking points are being refuted now that we know that omega-6s actually do hold up pretty well under high heat. And you have to look at smoke points of different oils, and we don't want to get into all of that today, but we know that those oils probably aren't as fragile as we once thought they were.
Yeah. I think there's always exception. Like I always tell people fish oil, flaxseed oil, any kind of like really
Well, those are your
delicate.
polyunsaturated. Yeah. And
Yeah,
so
yeah,
those are
your
very
omega
fragile.
3s. Your
Yeah,
omega
the
3s, like,
omega
should never
should
they
never
always should
be
be
heated.
refrigerated.
Yeah,
Yeah,
should
like
never be heated. Exactly.
yes. So take your flax seeds, take your chia seeds, take your fish oils, and put them in the fridge. They shouldn't even be on the shelf, like, in your kitchen, because of those delicate oils they have.
Yeah. And a lot of these oils too should be purchased in glass
Mhm.
because plastic can react unfavorably with fats. And we'll kind of talk about our own stance. I know that you have opinions on how you choose to consume vegetable oils and seed oils. And I definitely have opinions on it. But I think the main takeaway we want to really stress in this episode is that seed oils, vegetable oil are not necessarily to be feared or demonized as we once thought they were. And I subscribe to a lot of different practitioners' newsletters and got one from a well-known chiropractor, holistic health practitioner today. And the email subject line was how to detox your body from seed oils. And so again, the article went on to claim that seed oils are the worst thing you can put into your body in terms of creating an inflammatory response, and a whole protocol on how to detox yourself from seed oils, which literally seed oils don't just stick around and hang out in your body. You don't need to go through a special protocol to detox yourself from specific seed oils. So the whole headline is misleading, it's fear mongering. And, something else I want to talk about too is sort of the social determinants of health. And not everybody can afford to
Mhm.
specifically cook only with olive oil or coconut oil, for example, because these oils are a lot more expensive than vegetable oils.
Oh, man, isn't that true? Yeah, and I feel like I keep maybe repeating myself when I talk about this, but it's so hard for me to ignore the fact that these initiatives are clearly for the elite.
Oh,
Like
yeah.
you cannot tell people to just use tallow, just use olive oil, extra virgin olive oil. For everything. It's insanely expensive, and if you're a mom of three, single mom at that, on WIC, on food stamps, whatever it is, that's not realistic. And it just breaks my heart that this is the information our government is giving, to people who are trying to follow this advice and just be healthy for them and their family, and they can't live up to these expectations.
Well, and we've also talked about how replacing canola oil or vegetable oil in the food supply is going to drive up food costs. That's something that we haven't even heard about, but understand that yes, tallow is a perfectly fine fat source and it has health benefits too. But using saturated fats, tallow in the food supply is going to drive up the cost of certain foods to prices that we can't really imagine yet.
Yeah. Oh, 100%. And we'll see it. Don't worry. If it actually happens. I'm really curious to see where this is going to go, but it will come. The other thing I kind of always keep going back to is ultra processed foods are the majority of foods that contain seed oils, because they're cheap. And when I talk about ultra processed foods, I'm talking about like snack items like chips and cookies and things like that. And I really hate the optics that this movement is giving where it's okay, well, we'll just swap out a vegetable oil in these snack foods for a healthier oil. And then all of a sudden this snack is a lot healthier for you. Like, no, it's still a highly processed food.
Yeah, that's a good
Like,
point.
what's the message that we're giving here? It's not that we should be focusing on making these snack foods healthier. We should be teaching people how to eat healthier in general, which is always choosing whole foods first. And so I just feel like our time, our energy, our money talking about these topics, having this conversation is just kind of a waste of time in terms of the high priority items.
Yeah, that's really well said and a very good point. However, again, we're looking at access to food. A part of the social determinants of health are access to healthy food, access to whole foods, and a lot of these lower income areas in general only they live in food deserts.
Yeah.
There's not a lot of access to healthier foods, and so there might be more of a reliance on processed foods. And I do
Okay.
appreciate that we are looking at our food supply and trying not to poison the population. But I feel that we're just going about it in the wrong way. And really, we talked about how kind of the science is evolving here, and we're learning that omega 6 oils actually might have health benefits. Not only are they really not detrimental to our health, they actually are. There are a lot of studies now that correlate intake of plant based omega 6 oils, seed oils, vegetable oils with better health outcomes in terms of cardiovascular health and inflammation. So, this is going directly against what the holistic health community has been telling us. And again, we're learning and doing more studies and learning more about these. I also want to mention that a lot of these studies, and you'll see this really frequently with a lot of wellness influencers who maybe aren't as educated about how to interpret scientific studies. Some of these are in vitro studies or they're animal
Mhm.
studies done in rats, and that does not always have the proper correlation to how it might affect a human.
Yes, that's such a good point, is that so much I feel like of the studies that they are using to support their side of the story, which is also known as cherry picking, when
Yes,
you
cherry
equate
picking.
that with, scientific information. They're just using these studies that are specifically using like rats, for instance, instead of humans to actually be the subject. And you can't interpret science like that. It's apples and oranges.
Well, I want to call out too. There are two nutritionists on Instagram that I think we both follow. One is Dr. Ids, that's
Mm.
IDZ, and the other is BioLane. His name is, I think, is Lane Norton, and his handle on Instagram is BioLane, LAYNE. But they both really spend a lot of time educating the public on calling out how specific wellness influencers are cherry picking studies and data to support their points when they don't understand how to interpret these scientific studies. And these two have PhDs, at least one of them does, and have spent their careers learning how to sift through data and go through studies and apply them to human models. And so this is a really popular tactic in the wellness influencer and kind of holistic health community, is cherry picking when you don't really understand how to properly interpret data and then again tell your followers about the data. So I highly encourage people to check out those two because they do a really good job of kind of cutting through the fear mongering and also drawing some attention to some of these really popular influencers who are just giving you false information because they don't understand the data.
Yeah, yeah, well said. And understanding how individual foods or nutrients affect health and the outcome of health is very close to impossible to study. First of all,
Yeah.
funding. Nutrition's not exactly well funded
Well, and you
ever.
can't lock humans up in a lab and study them, right?
There you go. And that's the part of it, right? But again, you can't necessarily just say one food, one ingredient is going to do this for your health. You don't know the behaviors, the habits, the other things that people are ingesting. And a lot of the times in studies, they don't look at that. They're just focused on that one, solo ingredient or purpose of their study.
Yeah, that's
And
a really good
so
point.
yeah, and so sometimes even when studies come out and this is their outcome, these are the results, I take it with a grain of salt because I'm like, well, what other things were those people doing? How often were they exercising? How were their stress levels? What else were they eating? Were they eating fast food? Like we have no idea.
Well, and also it might not be the vegetable oils and the seed oils. If they're consuming mostly processed foods, there's a lot of sugar, there are a lot of other
Mhm.
unsavory ingredients in
Yeah, that's true.
our processed food supply. So how can we look at one isolated ingredient like you just said and
Yeah,
blame it on that?
yeah, yeah, yeah. And I think honestly, like at the end of the day, we just don't know. We just don't know the full story. Science is always changing. And we need to, I think, accept that because this like idea of this is fact for all time has never been the case. And we see this decade after decade how much the trends in nutrition and health have changed, how the recommendations change, and that's going to continue to happen.
Mm.
So, just because this is going on currently, which may or may not be scientific, what is happening, is probably not the same conversation that's going to happen 5 to 10 years from now.
Yeah, exactly. I think that this is really topical right now because a lot of the really smart physicians that are more geared towards holistic health and people who have PhDs that I follow have been really looking at the data and studying and changing their stance. Like Dr. Sarah Ballantyne, for example, who used to be known as the autoimmune paleo leader, has really come out and changed her stance on seed oils and wrote a really helpful kind of dissertation on her website about looking like really combing through these studies and coming out and saying, hey, maybe these things aren't as bad for us as we once thought.
Yeah. I think a lot of people are doing that. Or a lot of educated people are doing that, I should say.
Well,
Um,
yeah, and that's what we should be doing is always questioning and always looking at the data and the research, right?
yeah, exactly. And, you talked about our personal stances, and I think we've done a good job at covering that. But, I just want to reiterate that do not let this consume you. If you are able to be privileged and buy the oils that we're, mentioning that are superior, such as extra virgin olive oil that's in a glass dark container, that's maybe local and it's not coming from like across the world. Those are ideal if everyone were to be able to have the access to those types of products. But otherwise, the purpose, I think, of doing this episode was to also kind of put a stop to this whole fear mongering and to say it's not unsafe to consume these oils. And so if that's what you need to buy, that's okay. And so every individual is going to have to make those decisions for themselves. I would say, lucky enough to be able to maybe purchase the higher end, not all the time, but I'm also solo and single and I just provide for myself. Whereas if I had a family, that decision might be different. Right. So I think everyone has to kind of take their life and just into account when they're making those decisions.
Yeah, and for me personally, my stance is that I don't buy vegetable oils. I don't buy canola. I don't buy anything labeled vegetable oil. I don't cook with vegetable oils at home. I
Yep.
cook with olive oil
Yep.
predominantly is my main cooking oil, avocado oil, which actually has a very high smoke point. You do have to be careful with the quality of avocado oil because it is pretty expensive to produce and can be adulterated, meaning that it can be cut with other oils. But I
Mhm.
predominantly use those as my main cooking oil, and I feel good about those choices. So
Yeah.
that said, when I go to Whole Foods and I want to eat out of the hot bar, I'm not going to avoid something because it has
Yes.
canola.
Yep.
When I go to a restaurant, I'm not going to freak out and bring my own vial of olive oil and tell them to please cook my food in that, which is actually against restaurant safety standards. I think they don't let you do that, but I've known a lot of colleagues who have.
Yeah.
And so that's sort of my stance now, is that I do not stress myself out trying to avoid these vegetable oils or seed oils at all costs. So that said, I really do prefer to use avocado and olive oil because I do think that the health benefits of those two
Yeah.
specifically do surpass potentially the health benefits of maybe omega-6 oils, seed oils, vegetable oils. So that's just my personal preference. And that's what I tell my clients because I used to tell people I worked with avoid vegetable oils at all
Mhm.
costs. They're inflammatory, they are disease causing, and I don't really align with that
Yeah.
anymore.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
I'm not going to stress out when I go out to a restaurant or if I'm eating something that has canola in it, but I'm not going to cook with it at home. I feel comfortable about my choices using the specific cooking fats that I use at home.
Yeah, same, absolutely. And honestly, I other than obviously the health benefits and the studies that back up, especially virgin olive oil, you know, hence the Mediterranean diet, why it's so popular and why it's so highly rated amongst the medical community and some really big hospitals, right? That's like the go-to diet because it has shown a lot of promising results to help with almost every condition. So I I also just really love the taste of it.
Mm, mm-hmm.
I had mentioned last summer I spent the summer in Spain and they don't use anything but olive oil over there. I mean, olive oil is like salt and pepper. You don't have salt and pepper on the table. You have olive oil and vinegar. And not even vinegar. It's just olive oil. You put it on everything. You even just like drizzle it on things that we would never even think of drizzling it on here. And honestly, it just made everything taste so much better. So I kind of adapted that mindset coming back and or I should say habit. But yeah, I do the same. I think we're very similar, Mary, in terms of what we use. But I also use a lot of saturated fats, not a lot. I would use a modest amount. So, I do cook with butter sometimes. I do have a little bit of coconut oil every once in a while here and there. But I like to create variety. It's just like how I like eating different foods every day to get different types of nutrition in me. It's the same thing with fats. I like to kind of rotate my fats so that I'm not eating the same types of fats every single day.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And yeah, same here. I do love cooking with butter too. And it also makes a difference culinarily based on what you're wanting to make. Like I
Exactly.
love a really herby, grassy, unfiltered olive oil.
Yeah.
And that for roasting or something like dressing a salad where you really want those flavors to shine. Like it always kind of weirded me out that vegetable oils of all types, they're completely deodorized
Yeah.
so that they don't have any odor. And I was even taught in school the whatever fat you're using or oil you're using should smell like what it comes from. So olive oil should smell like olives, coconut oil should smell like coconuts. And what does rapeseed, which is canola oil, what does the rapeseed smell like? Well, we don't know
Yeah.
because that oil has been so heavily in part of the processing of vegetable oils, they deodorize them.
Yeah.
So that's always kind of weirded me out on a
Yeah.
personal level, but that doesn't make it scientific, does it?
Yeah. No, that's a really good point, and I think to an extent that also still is in the back of my mind, right? Which is why I don't personally buy vegetable oil. I just kind of accept that that's what is, reality when we go out to eat, and I'm okay with that.
And also, I think we mentioned this before, but most, if not all, vegetable oils that I see are always in plastic. And we know that fat kind of unfavorably reacts with being stored in plastic containers, especially if they come in contact with any heat. So it's best to always buy your fats or your cooking oils in glass where possible, and especially maybe darker glass that doesn't allow light to come in, which can cause it to go rancid or spoil more easily.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And I've never seen a vegetable oil come in a glass container, if I'm being honest.
I haven't even looked, but I'm pretty sure at Whole Foods they must have canola oil in glass.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. Actually, Whole Foods would be the one to carry it, but not like a
Safeway
supermarket
or
chain. Yeah,
yeah.
exactly. But yeah, so hopefully that information helps and just, puts people's mind at ease in terms of it being a, you know, end all be all terrible product for you.
Yeah, and I like what you said about just variety in general. Like the body really thrives on diversity with
Yep.
foods, fats. We need monounsaturated, saturated, polyunsaturated
Yeah.
fats. We need a diverse array of different nutrients, vitamins, minerals, antioxidants. So just rotating through as many different types of foods as you can has a better health outcome, yields better health.
Yeah. I can't remember the study, or like the exact details of this study that I'm thinking of, but it was something like 30 to 60 different plants a week will typically significantly change your microbiome to where it can significantly affect your health. But I kind of have that same mentality for everything, but I just remember that
Who
specifically for
can even
plants.
name 60 different plants?
I know.
But
I
yes,
know.
I know. You're right.
But it could be anything from, like, I didn't even realize this, it doesn't have to be produce. It can be literally, like, hemp seed, chia seeds, those all count as plant foods,
Right.
so it doesn't have to be just, like, what we think of, like, leafy greens.
Yeah, exactly. No, you're right. I was just kidding.
No, I know.